Welcome to the party. I'm Sam Ekstrom of Locked On Sports Minnesota. Will Rudy Gobert hang around long-term with the Timberwolves? We answer that question and more on today's Minnesota basketball party.
This is Locked On Sports Minnesota podcast. It's endless Minnesota Timberwolves talk with the diverse voices of your local experts. It's time for the Minnesota basketball party on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
It's Wolves Talk every Wednesday on the Minnesota Basketball Party. Welcome in. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network and also part of Locked On Sports Minnesota. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. We'd appreciate that. Let's get to 8,000 subscribers. We are so close. Then the march to 9,000 subscribers starts from there. You can also hear our podcast on the Locked On Wolves podcast feed, where Ben Beacon produces great daily Wolves content. Again, check out our audio on Locked On Wolves with Ben Beacon, who's usually a panelist, but he's not today. Unfortunately, we will meet the rest of our panel in a moment. But first, we are brought to you by FanDuel. With FanDuel, you can make every moment more, and you can also, through September 22nd, get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket with a $5 bet. Get that from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, Rudy Gobert around long-term. The rookies are going to have a big role, says Tim Connelly. And Anthony Edwards is doing photo shoots with Justin Jefferson. We're talking about all that today. Let's meet our panel with the opening tip.
I'm Jack Borman, co-host of the Locked On Wolves postcast with my man Luke Inman. And I'm excited to dive into whether or not these Timberwolves rookies are going to be able to handle the load that the Timberwolves are going to place on them this season and just how they react early in the year.
I'm Reggie Wilson, sports director at KARE 11, and Anthony Edwards and Justin Jefferson are ready to break the internet.
And I'm Ron Johnson, former Gophers wide receiver, Gophers Hall of Famer. And I have to talk about why long-term relationships only work out in marriage. There's something to this: break up, make up, but then move on. We'll talk about that coming up next.
I imagine we'll get to this in the Rudy Gobert conversation. And again, I'm Sam Ekstrom, executive producer here at Locked On Sports Minnesota. So Tim Connelly did an interview locally with Darren Wolfson of KSTP. You might know him as Doogie. Here's the quote from Connelly, and this has been rumbled about for a while. Rudy Gobert's contract is expiring after next season. It's a player option. We assume he'll pick that up. So 2 years left with Rudy as scheduled now. But Connelly says this: we'd like Rudy to be here for a long time. We love his agent. He's been a friend for a long time. He's one of the best guys in the league. Certainly our goal with most of these guys is to keep them here as long as they want to be here. Ideally, I think continuity is going to be one of the better strengths we have going into the season, and we really like our core group. Rudy Gobert is 32 years of age right now. He's signed through, age 34. Ron Johnson, since you teased it, we'll start with you on the potential of Rudy Gobert being around long-term beyond the current contract. What say you about that?
I say no. Here's the reason why. Rudy Gobert, as the taller, and this is about taller guys. Taller guys seem to, like, knees, ankles, feet seem to go fast. Like, if you remember Shaq towards the end of his career, he talks about it on TNT now, he doesn't talk about it. Barkley and them talk about how he was stealing money just on benches, and how Kenny Smith and them make jokes about him being on some of those teams like the Suns and the Celtics. I watched a movie. I think it was a Tyler Perry movie. Reggie might remember this. Can't remember exactly the movie. But Blair Underwood was the actor, and he was telling the woman, he was like, you know what I liked about Lena Horne? Lena Horne was a woman. She knew when it was time for her to stop singing. Like, that's where I feel like Rudy Gobert is going to end up, where Shaq didn't know when it was time to stop playing. Like, Shaq should have been on TV way sooner than he did. And so I just don't want Tim Connelly to fall in love with the guy he's known for a while, a defensive prowess type of guy, to get locked into him, to where money is stretched, to where you can't pay a guy like Naz Reid, to where you can't maybe sign a guy like Lauri Markkanen. I just think Rudy Gobert, I think there's more guys out there like him that you can get away with keeping Cat and Ant. Like, you got to keep your big two. That big three, he's not giving you points. Like, if it was Chris Bosh, who's giving you 3-pointers, spreading the floor out. Again, I know I'm hating on defense maybe a little bit, but I just feel like as he gets older, I don't know if it's gonna work. Like, like if he's out a lot of the games, if he's on load management, I just don't see the point. Break up, make up. Hey man, I'm sorry we broke up, and then move on. Like I just think that's why that song was created. That like break up to make up. That's all we do. Like just break up and then make up, but then move on. Just say, hey, we can be friends, but I need somebody younger. I need somebody that can go down the stretch with Anthony Edwards and Karl-Anthony Towns. That's just me though.
Ron's all about the Leo DiCaprio model. Go find it at a certain point.
When they're 25, move on.
I tend to agree with Ron for, my reasoning is that there's like 5 guys in this core that I'd love to keep around, like Tim Connelly said. I don't know if it's realistic. We know the Wolves are in money trouble, but I'd rather keep Ant around. I'd rather keep Cat around. I'd rather keep Nas around, and probably McDaniels around too. So if it's a matter of priority, I don't think Rudy's on my list immediately to keep around long term. Now, Jack, you've laid out why extending him could have financial benefits for the short term, but in terms of the long term, having that contract on the books down the road, what do you think the ramifications are there?
Yeah, I think it's certainly a fascinating conversation in that, if this were to have to happen, it would probably have to happen rather quickly before the season starts, just because Rudy Gobert is extension eligible this summer. Will continue to be throughout the season. And I think for Rudy, when you look at the fact that he's got a player option looming for next season, or I guess a year from now, it would be interesting if the Timberwolves came to him and said, hey, like, let's rip up that player option, because it is a pretty hefty price tag for someone of what Rudy Gobert has contributed to the team, since he's been here. And I think you could say, hey, like, let's maybe take a little bit of a pay cut on that. And we'll get you, instead of, a 1 year, player option deal where you're making, an egregious amount of money. Let's just say, hey, let's extend you for 3 years, and let's call it maybe $75 million. You can kind of spread that cap hit out a little bit more, and maybe you front load it a little bit too, so that your salary hit is descending over the course of the contract. And if you do something like that, I think being able to take Rudy Gobert's player option down from 46.6 million, which is what it's going to be for 25-26, and maybe reducing that number to something like 25 or 27 million dollars, something like that. I mean, you can directly turn that 18-19 million dollars that you save right around into trying to pay a guy like Naz Reid and make sure that Naz Reid can stay here long term. Because I think if Naz Reid was willing to bypass free agency to stick around in Minnesota, before last season, I think it's really hard to think that he wouldn't do that again this time around, provided that the Timberwolves approached his negotiations from a fair standpoint. They didn't just lowball him. They were serious about trying to, kind of work the cap minutia to make it work. And I think step one in clearing a runway to keep Naz Reid here long term, at least before he would hit free agency, would be to extend Rudy Gobert. And I think, there's definitely another side to the argument that I certainly hear with Ron, and I think is certainly a fair one, in that, hey, you want to make sure that you're not paying a guy like Rudy Gobert a year too early and giving him, a 2, 3, 4 year extension, whatever the case may be, before you see him healthy for a second season in a row. And having him prove that he can handle a deep playoff run for the second year in a row. And I think that's certainly a very valid, point. I think, we'll be in the same position next year where, you could do that same extension next year if you wanted to as well. So it'll be interesting to see just kind of how Connelly navigates that. And, I guess how much external pressure there ends up becoming with that Naz Reid contract looming, because it's pretty much a guarantee that he's going to opt out of that player option before the 25-26 season.
Certainly a lot of factors in play. And it requires a lot of people, Reggie, to play ball. If you want to keep a core group together, an expensive core, it requires people to make some sacrifices. We saw Mike Connelly make a financial sacrifice probably with his extension. Very, very fair price compared to the market. Maybe Rudy Gobert could do the same as Jack suggested. And Reggie, to some extent, it comes down to whether you continue to envision the player that Rudy Gobert is working with this team for the long haul versus trying something different. And, I think the Wolves have had one great example of where it didn't work out great in 2023. And then last year where it worked out fantastically. What direction would you fall in this regard?
This is a tough one because when you kind of think about all the factors, like, yes, he has helped instill great team defense, but also maybe it was a little bit of a stretch, a little bit of a, it was a really big deal that Tim Connelly made, to start his tenure in Minnesota anyway. And man, it's so tough because I just saw, what was that, yesterday? Derek Lively was on a pod and Rudy Gobert came up and he just talked about how Rudy just wasn't the guy. And that continues to be the conversation we saw in the Olympics, down the stretch. He's handing out water and Gatorade. Like, he's not, contributing in the game. But then, you talk to Tim Connelly and he talks about how much Rudy means to the team. Obviously, he thinks very highly of him because he traded for him. And, considering what he told Doogie, like, he wants to continue to move forward with him. But I think you still have the image of Luka Doncic calling game on him in the playoffs. And you still have a lot of the images of, his hands being bad and him fumbling, passes out of bounds and, all that good stuff. But then you also think about some of the defensive plays that he has made. I think it's just so tough when you think about paying a person $40+ million in today's NBA and they don't have much of an offensive skill set. I think that is maybe like Rudy Gobert back in like the 90s. Maybe he's a dream of a player to have, because you don't need him to do much offensively. But it's tough, man. I've been watching Clipped on FX, and it talks a lot about DeAndre Jordan and some of his struggles and things like that. But at DeAndre Jordan's peak, he could catch some lobs and he was a good defender. And, I think that's kind of what you expect from Rudy, and you don't fully get that. And so I know it's a tough situation because it's not necessarily in Tim Connelly's hands. And I think he's posturing very well, saying the things that he's saying right now because he wants Rudy to be able to play ball when it comes down to it. But I do think that Rudy has helped instill the team defense mindset with the Wolves. And if he were to move forward away from the Timberwolves, breaking up, as Ron said, that was a Medea's family reunion movie reference that Ron gave earlier, by the way, with Blair Underwood. But I think if they were to break up, I think it would allow some of the other guys like a Naz Reid to be able to shine. And I think that they wouldn't necessarily miss a step, but there's just not enough money to go around. If you say you want to raise Cat's jersey into the rafters one day and you want to continue to keep him around. And that was something that Connelly told me last week at the fair when we got a chance to chat one-on-one. He still believes in Cat and wants to see him take his game to the next level because he believes that he can do that. And so at a certain point, you gotta figure out, like, okay, well, I keep saying I love all these people. It's like a guy with several wives. Like, which one does he love the most? He keeps saying, like, hey, like, I love this one because she does this, and I love this one, and but then, like, when it comes down to it and rubber meets the road and you have to pick one, it's like, dang, I don't know if I can pick one. I love them all. And it's gonna be tough because that $40+ million, like, you can't You can't move forward with that. But it's not necessarily just in Tim's hands. Like, Rudy has to play ball, but I guess there's not really much of a scenario unless he finds a trade partner that doesn't see Rudy with the Wolves for the next 3-4 years, because the ball is in his hands with that player option.
First, quick follow-up with Reggie. Scale of 1 to 10, how good is clipped?
Yeah, 6.
Okay. Moderate. Like, not a must-watch, it sounds like. Okay. I liked Rudy last year a lot. Like, I did a 180 on Rudy Gobert, and I think that there's reason to love what he does with the Wolves. But sometimes I view Rudy as the nose tackle that is the best run stuffer in the NFL. He's Linval Joseph, but he can't rush the passer. And at some point, you value the run stuffing. It's amazing, but could you get 75% of that at a quarter of the cost? That's the question that faces the Wolves, I think, with the Rudy Gobert conundrum. If you can lower that price down, like Jack suggested, to $25 million a year instead of $45 million a year, that would feel a lot better. I mean, that would be a different story for me. So I'm interested to see how this plays out. When we return, we go from talking about an aging veteran to the rookies. Tim Connelly had some good comments about them and their roles this upcoming season. We'll weigh in on that coming up next on the Minnesota Basketball Party. We are brought to you today by FanDuel. NFL football starts on Thursday, and then a game on Friday, and then a lot of games on Sunday. And this is why it matters with FanDuel. You can bet $5 on FanDuel and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. That's now through September 22nd. It's available to all customers. With a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel any time. So you go to FanDuel.com, download America's #1 sportsbook, download the app on your mobile device if you want to go that route, and it becomes a little more interesting if you've got NFL Sunday Ticket and you've got, let's say, the Dolphins -3.5 against the Jaguars, a line that I particularly like. A little more fun if you can watch that and you have a wager on that. You can make it happen at FanDuel.com. Get that 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket. All right, great lineup here at Locked On Sports Minnesota, by the way. Ron Johnson show on Tuesdays, Minnesota football parties live on Mondays and Thursdays, and our roundtable show on Fridays where we talk all Minnesota sports. Hit that subscribe button, by the way. Hey, the everydayers, you know what it's all about. Make sure you get notified when we're going live. All right, start with Jack Borman this time. Jack, I got to hear your take on these comments from Tim Connelly talking about the rookies, Terrence Shannon Jr. and Rob Dillingham. Here's what he said in this same interview. We don't want to put too much on any young guy's shoulders, but we're going to put a lot on their shoulders. Obviously, they're going to have to prove they've earned those minutes, but where we are, we become a pretty expensive team, so we're going to have to find some spots for these young guys. We know it's not always going to be pretty. When you think of title contenders, Jack, you don't often see rookies playing big roles, let alone 2 rookies playing big roles in the rotation. And yet it feels like we are headed for that. Yes, the Wolves have assembled a bit of a bench. They've got Nikhil. They've got Nas. They have key bench pieces, but those 8th and 9th spots are really up for grabs. Joe Ingles in the mix as well. But Dillingham and Shannon, looks like they're going to be significant contributors this year. Where do you think that meshes with a team's title contending aspirations?
Yeah, I mean, just look at what the Dallas Mavericks did last year. I know that I think it was Reggie brought up Derek Lively. I mean, when you give a rookie a very clearly defined role in something where it says, hey, we're gonna rely on what you're really good at and place you in a role where you're going to be asked to do those things. I think that good things happen. And for the Timberwolves, I think with Rob Dillingham, you're putting him in a position where he's really comfortable as a scorer. That's what he does. He's a professional scorer, and you'd hope that he'll be able to rely on some of the really high level playmaking skills that he has too, especially in the pick and roll with Rudy Gobert. Hopefully kind of activate him a little bit more in the lob game. But I think these 2 rookies too are going to be really important to a few things that Tim Connelly wants to get a lot better at. And the first of that is pace, right? we've heard Tim Connelly say that he wants guys to play quicker. He wants the Timberwolves to be in transition more. And I think those two guys with their athleticism and their ability to just kind of look up the floor and make outlet passes and hit guys in stride, I think is going to be really important. We saw Terrence Shannon Jr., how much of a, just a dynamic force he was in transition and playing the passing lanes and getting out for easy buckets in transition in summer league. I think that's something that they're certainly going to try to lean into more when you're thinking about the fact that he's going to replace some of the minutes left behind by Kyle Anderson with, just another big physical, strong guy on the wing. I think it's going to be interesting to see what kind of the contrast of what he brings versus what Kyle Anderson brought. And I think, it's really going to come down to, in my view, how can Rob Dillingham's offense really make up for how much he's going to be hunted defensively, I think is the first thing you think about with Rob. And then with TJ Shannon, I think it's really going to be about his 3-point shooting. If TJ Shannon's 3-point shooting is something that he's going to be able to do well at the NBA level. You're not talking about a guy who's shooting like 31, 32%. If he's able to shoot closer to 37, 38% from three, like we saw in summer league, I think he's going to play a ton of minutes because we feel really confident that his ability to put the ball on the deck and get to the rim and finish is going to be certainly his most translatable NBA skill when you consider how strong and physical he is with the ball in his hands. And then with Rob Dillingham, I think we saw flashes of greatness near the end of summer league with his ability to score off the bounce and his ability to create his own shot. I think are just two really, really important things. And I think, if the Wolves can find a way to put those two guys in spots where you're asking them to do what they're best at, much like Dallas did with Lively, where it's, hey, set screens for Luka Doncic, roll to the rim, finish lobs and protect the rim. I think the Timberwolves rookie should be fine. And we talked about this, Sam, in the BR live show that we did. And that, I think the Timberwolves schedule also sets up really nicely. They play a decent number of pretty soft defenses in the first 2-3 weeks of the season. And I think that will really help those two guys get acclimated a little bit easier on the offensive end of the floor.
Yeah, it'd be nice if you could be up by 20 in the second half of some games and give them extended minutes and give them that garbage time to get more comfortable. Let's swing it to Reggie. What do you got?
So, yeah, that was one of the things that I talked to Tim about last week as well. And, he talked about how he was really impressed and he came away, really impressed with what he saw from those guys. But here's the thing, man, like with the money being what the money is and the team constructed the way that they're constructed, like, yeah, they will have to find a role on the team. And, you kind of made a big swing for a guy like Rob Dillingham. And I think him kind of coming in and learning under Mike Conley and continue to get pushed and practice by all the guys there. Like, I could see him cracking the rotation and really kind of being that spark off the bench to kind of help them, maybe starting off 10, 12 or so minutes a game. So I'm looking forward to seeing, his growth. And I think, Shannon could be a guy to come in and just get some buckets. Like, I think he showed what he can do in his brief summer league action. The one thing about Shannon is he is older than most rookies would be. And so, like, he's kind of a little bit more developed than maybe some of the other guys would be. And I think that kind of suits him well to kind of find his niche and really kind of find his way into the rotation. So I think it's a luxury for the Wolves to have, young guys who are hungry, who, can infuse with some of the veteran talent and leadership that they have. And I just think that once they kind of find their footing, they can really help the Wolves kind of soar to some levels that maybe they couldn't get to last year.
Ron Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the Wolves stats, I mean, they were real top heavy. And so we always talked about all season, we talked about like who's going to be the next guy, who's going to be the guy to fill in when Mike Conley can't go, who's going to be the guy to fill in when Anthony Edwards needs a breather. And we never really had an answer. Not a true answer. Like they traded for guys, they bought guys in. But I think Tim Connelly's point is I drafted these guys knowing what I needed. I went up and got a guy higher than probably people assumed I should have, but I did it because I know what I needed. I've made this work with the Nuggets. I've built a team. I put it together, and I think that's what he's doing. He's putting pieces together of scorers. He's putting guys on the floor now that can come in and be off-ball scorers. They can be on-ball scorers. They can be on-ball facilitators. I think he's gotten, Rob Dillingham and Shannon. If you watch those guys in college, they created, they were explosive. They played the game at a high level. And so I think that's what he's saying is when he says, I'm expecting a lot of these rookies. It's just that, like, he knows what he already has. I know I have Anthony Edwards, Karl-Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert, Naz Reid, Jay McDaniel. Like, I have a squad. I need you two to come off the bench or maybe start a game if Mike Conley's on rest. I need you guys to come off the bench or fill in and not drop a, like, we don't slow down. We don't stop. It doesn't get weird. It doesn't get off kilter. I go back to that Karl-Anthony Towns 70-point game or whatever. Mike Conley's not in there. All hell broke loose. I truly believe if you have a point guard, another point guard out there who actually can control the game a little bit, who's willing to dribble the ball up the court, slow the game down, call the game once he knows it, which Rob Dillingham, I think, will. You don't run into that game where all of a sudden you're losing the game after Carl's trying to, losing his mind, trying to go for whatever. I think you have another guy that can go out there and score some baskets and willing to, like, take some heat off of some of the guys. So that's what I like him saying that, but also that puts the rookies on notice now. You got to work. Like, you're not going to be able to sit back and be that 8th, 9th guy and do nothing. Like, you need to come in knowing you're going to work. Like, that's like with the Bears telling Caleb Williams from day one, you're the guy. We don't have another guy behind you. So don't sit up here and think you're going to get to sit out. Whereas like JJ McCarthy did. It's the same thing in the NBA. They're coming in. Like, whoever gets Cooper Flag next year, he's coming in to be a guy. Like, I think a lot of teams are already looking at him like, oh my goodness, this could be a guy. And so I like Tim Connelly kind of early saying, hey, look, I'm going to need you guys this year. So whatever you got to do this offseason training camp, you got to be up to speed and ready to go.
You know what's exciting about this rookie class for the Wolves is that we know they're going to be playing in meaningful basketball. Like, and it hasn't me as excited for this rookie class as I have been for Wolves rookies in a long time. Like, even Cat and Ant, number 1 overall picks, when they drafted them, the Wolves weren't a good team. Like, we assumed that they would kind of be slogging along and like making their way on a 25-win team. These rookies are going to be playing under the bright lights right away. So we're going to find out really what they're all about in year one, and we expect a lot from them in year one.
And they've got great veteran mentors, which I think is really, really important. You think about how far Anthony Edwards has come with having, being right next to Mike Conley for the last 2 years, I think has been unbelievable. And it's hard to envision, there not being a similar effect there with Mike Conley and both those guys.
Yeah, unquestionably. This is going to be fun. Coming up next, we're talking about Justin Jefferson and Anthony Edwards doing a photo shoot together. And it raises the conversation. Could this duo be more iconic than the last duo to do a photo shoot, Kevin Garnett and Randy Moss? Let's rile some people up after a very short pause on the Minnesota Basketball Party. I imagine most have seen the leaked photo. Anthony Edwards wearing a Justin Jefferson jersey, Justin Jefferson wearing an excellent Anthony Edwards jersey. It's the old black alternate jersey with like the green tree line on the border. It's great. I loved those third jerseys back in the day. Mirroring what we saw with KG and Moss doing the cross sport photo shoot about 20 years ago. I came from the generation where I had the Kevin Garnett poster on the wall. I had the Randy Moss poster on the wall. Those are the guys that made me a sports fan. They ushered me into like my generation of loving sports. So those two, in my mind, basically untouchable. But for the kids growing up now, the 16-year-olds, Justin Jefferson and Anthony Edwards are that duo. So my question goes out to all of you, and we'll start with Reggie this time. Like, which duo is more iconic, or could Jefferson and Ant eventually reach KG and Moss status?
Yeah, I think you got two guys who are Hall of Famers. So I don't think that you can give Ant and Jefferson the nod just yet, but they're on their way. They're on their way, and they got some sauce. Like, they are two of the most popular athletes going right now, regardless of it being Minnesota or not. Ant's just coming off the Olympics. Justin Jefferson just signed richest contract for a wide receiver in NFL history. So, like, they got some sauce cooking right now. Like, but it's simmering. It's simmering. Like, I don't think you're at a boiling point just yet. But this pick has been clamored for, has been asked about for seemingly like a few years now. And now that it's gonna happen, like I said, got some potential to break the internet here with this photo. So I think these are two guys that a lot of people love. Probably two of the most well-liked guys around as far as athletes go. And so I'm looking forward to just continuing to see their careers ascend. But I think you got to give Moss and Garnett the edge right now, just because like those two guys are like iconic. One's got a championship, one went to a Super Bowl. Like, Ant got the Olympics. Like, that's good, but they haven't necessarily reached that point yet. But like, they're getting there. They're getting there.
Yeah, there was a stretch there, 98 NFC Championship, 2000 NFC Championship, 2003, 2004, they won a playoff game. Like, the Vikings were competitive every year with Moss. The Timberwolves were in the playoffs every year with KG. It took them a while to win a playoff series, but those teams always felt like they were in the mix to win a championship. And Ron Johnson, you were playing for the Gophers kind of during the peak, during the craze where KG and Moss ran the town. Did you feel that buzz when you were playing at the U?
Yeah, of course. I mean, 98, we already know we had Dwayne Clemens on the Ron Johnson show. He was one of the linebackers, defensive ends when the kicker missed the kick. And so that was like Minnesota history. And Randy Moss at the time was he was the best receiver in the NFL, even though he had just come into the league. Like, everybody right away was like, oh man, this guy is like, this is ridiculous. Like, Jake Reed was a 1,000-yard receiver and took a back seat to Randy Moss. And then Chris Carter, who is a Hall of Famer, eventually started taking a back seat to Randy Moss. And so, yes, that was big. And then KG, coming out of high school, it was always the knock on high school athletes. Like, can they actually do it? Can they get it done? KG was one of the ones that came in and said, yep, we can get it done. Here's how we're going to get it done. I remember meeting KG. I had dislocated my finger, and then I went out and played anyway against Wisconsin. And I remember meeting KG in like a bar downtown. I can't remember which one it was, like Tropics or something. And he's like, oh man, I heard about, they said you're the guy that the receiver that, broke your fingers and still went out there and played this Saturday. And I was like, yep. And so just having that conversation with him about being a dog, and like they captivated Minnesota. But here's where I go with this. They didn't have social media. They didn't have cell phones and iPhones for kids to have screensavers. Justin Jefferson and Anthony Edwards will be so many screensavers, which is weird for you grown men, but I get it. Will be so many people's screensavers, especially high school kids that love sports. They will be people's avatars on Twitter and Instagram. They will be used on people's Twitch accounts and their work accounts and their screensavers on their laptops and iPads. It is going to be more iconic for the simple fact of what AI can do with this photo shoot. What can happen? I also say Justin Jefferson is a Hall of Famer. Like, Justin Jefferson, we know is going in the Hall of Fame. Like, we can book that right now. Anthony Edwards has a chance. Just being a star right now isn't enough, because Kyrie Irving, we would have said yes, but now Kyrie, you just never know. But if you want to look at this, I personally say yes, it's going to be more iconic for this thing here. The internet's way different. Back when I had to use AOL dial-up to get the internet, now super fast. AOL is I don't even know if that thing's around anymore, but I think it's going to be more iconic because of social media.
Jack Borman.
Yeah, I think it's certainly a fun way to kind of bridge the gap, right? Because when Moss and KG were here, it was kind of like, for people that were, my age, it was when you were really, really young. And that was kind of the first memories that you have of Minnesota sports. And then you kind of grew up for the most part outside of the links in just this barren wasteland of, just sports agony. And I think the way that we've now found our way back to a duo that has kind of restored that feeling that so many people felt in the late 90s, early 2000s, I think is really, really cool. And the way that, you have it in two guys that are so similar to the old duo in terms of how personable they are, how marketable they are, how much they love being here, how much the fan base, adores both of them in such, steadfast ways. I think it's just really cool. I think it's really, really, everybody should be very thankful that these two guys have the same agency. They're both represented by WME Sports, because if they weren't, I don't think that this thing ever happens. But I think it's, just like Ron said, I think it's just something that's going to live for a long, long time because of, how many kids are going to be, having that picture everywhere. And I just think it's super cool because both these guys are friends. I've met Justin Jefferson in the Wolves locker room. I think, like, I was in there one night talking to Ant after a game. I think it was just like, asking him about like some interaction he had with a ref or something like that. Cameras were off and I felt two hands come on my shoulders, and you turn around, it's Adrian Peterson and Justin Jefferson wanting to talk. And it's like really cool the way that Ant is connected with these guys and the way that they've reciprocated that love. I just think the way the two teams support each other is awesome. And the way those two individuals support each other is really cool as well. And I just think it's a great thing for every single Minnesota sports fan that they've got two guys that are now signed to be here long-term, and love being with one another.
I absolutely love it. I hope there's some video content that comes out of this shoot. I hope it's not just a still photo. I hope there's a little bit of content, a little bit of banter between the two, talking about their common challenges or things that they go through in a season. I would love to hear and see some of that, two legends locally talking. Before we conclude today's show, we got to catch up on the links. It's the Minnesota basketball party after all. We got 7 games left in the regular season. Reggie, I want 1 minute. What's the latest with the links?
Man, they're rolling. I thought they would never lose again. I didn't. And then they ran into Enrique and the Dallas Wings and they lost, but then they flipped it, won the next game. They look good, man. Like, it's so funny because, like, I thought that Asia was like the far and away runaway with the MVP conversation. And especially in these last like several games coming back from the Olympic break, like, there's a case to be made that Fee could be MVP as well. And so I'm interested to see how that race comes out, because there were a couple games where, Asia has some games that you wouldn't expect from her, some down games, even though she's, still getting double doubles and all that stuff. But she's like a 27 point per game scorer, which is insane. And, she's scoring like maybe 13, 14 points there for a few games, and they're losing games, including a couple to the Lynx. And so I'm interested to see how this plays out. I think that getting Maisha Hines-Allen was a great addition, just because it doesn't seem that they're fully comfortable yet with Alyssa Peely and what she could do. She's not really getting a whole lot of minutes, and so getting Maisha Hines-Allen, sister of Josh Hines-Allen, with the Jags, who just got paid this offseason. Good pedigree in that family, obviously, but she's been a great addition to the team. And Cheryl just has a way of getting good pieces. Like, there's no like true like superstar on the team other than maybe Fee, but they play with such a chemistry and such a connected. Is connectedness a word? But I'm just gonna go with it.
Go with it.
They just play so well together that it just looks good out there. And I keep saying it, but they look championship level, and I'm interested to see how far they take this thing.
Jack, how do the Lynx stack up against the other heavyweights in the WNBA? 30 seconds.
Yeah, they stack up pretty well. I mean, when you look at they played the Liberty 3 times. They're 2-1 against them. Won the Commissioner's Cup. Liberty are the best offense in the league. Really like to space you out and shoot a bunch of threes. But the good news is the Lynx have the horses defensively to be able to match that, and they've shown that in the regular season. They're 0-2 against the Sun. They lost to the Sun last year in the playoffs as well. Just a really tough physical team that I think just kind of overpowers the Lynx inside a little bit. And they just added Marina Mabry before the break to give them some more perimeter scoring juice. So I think the Sun is actually probably the worst matchup for them. And they're 3-1 against the Aces. Like Reggie said, Nafisa Collier just dominated Asia Wilson in 2 back-to-back matchups. Nafisa Collier out-rebounded the entire Aces team in a game last week, which is only the 3rd time in league history that ever happened. And the Aces are relying too much on older players in Chelsea Gray and 34-year-old Tip Hayes, who came out of retirement. The Lynx are 3-1 against them. So I think you got to like that matchup if you're the Lynx. And then against the Storm too. Can't forget about them. Got a ton of talent on that team. They're 3-1 against the Storm this season, but they're a different team considering that Skylar Diggins-Smith missed all last season, returning from giving birth, and they now have French Olympic star Gabby Williams back in the fold, who they've had for the last few seasons. So certainly have some increased firepower, but I think the Lynx can beat any of these teams on any given night. It's just I think the Sun are the toughest matchup for them.
Ron, you get the final word on the Lynx. 30 seconds.
I mean, the biggest thing right now is, like Reggie said, it did feel like for a while they weren't going to lose, but 24-9 is nothing to like worry about right now. There's a great record. Like they're leading the Western Conference. They are still behind the Sun and Liberty. Well, technically tied with the Sun, but I guess they have the tiebreaker. So they're third overall in the league. But the biggest thing I looked at is, again, I go back to the game I went to and then the one I watched. Nafisa Collier is an absolute beast. And for them to go far when there's games up, and I think they brought up the rebounded thing, she's got to clear the glass every time. A lot of times in games, like you look at the sky with Angel Reese, and some people say she's padding her stats. I don't think so. I think she just can't make layups. She's on the glass and she's out working, out hustling everybody. I think Nafisa Collier has to do this. Like she has to do that in those big moments. She's got to clear the glass, because when you think about the Sun and the Liberty, it's about getting the ball back up quick. It's about getting the ball down the court. And for them, again, this is a team I watched. They have the ability to knock down the three. If they miss, you got to have the ability to get that rebound and kick it out or put it back up, because second chance baskets are going to be the biggest thing to help them propel and try to go win. I mean, honestly, I didn't know they would be better than the Aces, but they are. And so the Aces, and I saw, what's her name? Asia Wilson says she's not wearing regular clothes until they win again, until they're in the win column or whatever. And so she's wearing a white T-shirt. They're 21-12. So I don't really understand. Maybe she just meant since the All-Star break, I guess, in the win column. But again, I think they can do it.
I love it. Good analysis, fellas. We do this every Wednesday. It's the Minnesota Basketball Party, part of Locked On Sports Minnesota, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Please subscribe. Listen to us on the Locked On Wolves podcast feed. Jack Borman, Reggie Wilson, Ron Johnson. I'm Sam Ekstrom. Talk to you next week on the Minnesota Basketball Party.